is Esko Ronimus from Finland. Right out of the bat, ask questions if you got something during my presentation. So, the 200 sword in Bolognese tradition, it's we can call it continuation to these guys' presentations because Fiore, Buddy and the dudes, and then the next part is the Bolognese tradition if we look at the chronology. Not quite, but fits there nicely. That's me. So, my background is in Chinese martial arts, 25 years or so. I still do them, but mainly I teach nowadays historical fencing for my living. My values and approach to the training is pretty much the same as in Pedro and Jacopo because we work in association, so I'm not going to explain those things too much because I think you talked about those. I live in Finland, Tampere. I teach Tampere School of Arms. It's my school that I found about 5 years ago when I started my own way with the historical fencing. And I said the Palestra is within the HIMA context, and my main focus is the Bolognese fencing or the Bolognese tradition. So when we talk about the Bolognese tradition, we can call the Bolognese tradition because it's well, Bologna the place, and in a fairly small time frame there are the main masters of Bolognese tradition, and all the masters share the same terminology, same tactics, theory of fencing, and so on. So this is what I refer as the tradition when I talk. And of course, trying to train it as an actual martial art, not reenactment or something else. But this is of course in line with what Pedro has already told you. So, the main Bolognese masters that I use in my work are Antonio Manciolino, Achille Marozzo, and Giovanni Dalla Cocchia. Then there is the Anonimo Bolognese, and well, those are the four principal ones. Giovanni Dalla Cocchia is the latest one. I think is 1572. This is manual, I think, but he doesn't talk about the two-handed sword at all. The main source for the Bolognese two-handed sword is Achille Marozzo's work, because he has a very comprehensive section of two-handed sword. He has the basics and some of the tactics, and like a basic place, these are your basic strikes and basic guards and so on, but he has 3 assaltos or assalti forms, which are fairly big ones, and they contain a lot of information if you can interpret them in a good way. The second big source is the Anonimo Bolognese. Anonimo Bolognese, we don't know the exact date for it, but it's probably in the first part or the early part of the 16th century, at least. Well, that's the general understanding. Anonimo Bolognese has, like Marozzo, Antonio Manciolino and Giovanni Dalla Cocchia, it's a very holistic system, so there is all the weapons. Not everybody has all the weapons, but the main weapons are there. So, Anonimo also has a fairly long section of the two-handed sword, but the problem is that part of the Anonimo manuscript is missing, so we could say it's only half of the two-handed sword material that has survived for our times and in our use. Because in the Bolognese fencing, you generally divide the techniques that come from the right, from the truant side, and from the left, that comes from the falset side. And the Anonimo's work concerns only the falset side. So we can assume that there was the truant side, and as with the other stuff, like say one-handed sword, solo one-handed sword, there is always accompanying theory and this kind of discussion, but the falset place of the two-handed sword is all that we have from Bolognese, the Anonimo Bolognese. Of course, it's not completely impossible to apply the same rules that he gives us for the falset side to the truant side, so it is very usable material. And again, as with Marozzo and the other guys, The Bolognese masters rarely give you all the information in one chapter, but it's spread out through the whole work. So if you want to understand how to use the two-handed sword, you definitely have to look how to use one-handed sword and sword and buckler and all the weapon combinations, because they give the different tactics and aspects of fighting in different places. So Marozzo has the basic and 3 assalti, which are fairly long. The first assalto is gioco largo, so wide distance plays, big movements, controlling the distance, tempo, that kind of things. Also the first assalto is for practicing fencing for beginners, because you get to do the movements and find the rhythm with your opponent, understand the distancing and that kind of thing, but without the actual contact. So it's a beginner friendly way. And as Marozzo says, it's also good for showing off. So if you want to look cool in a social situation where the sword swinging is somewhat accepted, it's also good for that. Anonimo, on the contrary, he goes straight to the actual fighting business. So that's not for showing, but it's for fighting, as is most of his work. Mangiolino is interesting because he doesn't give us any place for a two-handed sword. He completely omits it from his manual, but he references it in the tactics parts. For example, he says that it's very important that when you go close to your enemy, that you look their left hand while fencing with the two-handed sword. Because if you're fencing with the two-handed sword and you go close, the left hand will almost always be the hand that will be doing a grappling and that kind of things. So it's very probable that, well, we cannot know. But I would think that if Mangiolino gives you this kind of advice, he knew how to practice or fence with the two-handed sword. So maybe he practiced and fenced and taught the material, but for one reason or another, it didn't end up in the book. Hard to say. But yeah, those are the 2 principal ones. There are of course more, but these I consider the principal ones that I use in my work at the moment. Of course, later on, probably will be expanding at some point, but I like to dig deep with the material at one go. Yeah, we'll come back. So the two-handed sword itself, the Marozzo and Anonimo, they only refer it as spada due mani, so two-handed sword. They don't use the spadone. They don't use the spadone. Maybe other people did, but again, we cannot know. Some sources say that this kind of sword is a spadoncino, or I don't remember the Italian term, but small two-handed sword for dueling practice. So small spadone for dueling. But neither of the dudes, Marozzo and Anonimo, make no reference to it. So we generally talk about the two-handed sword. And of course, there are no clear-cut lines between the weapon names and so on, but in any case, the size of the weapon and the type of the weapon, clearly it's not a spadone, like a really big two-handed sword. Because from other sources we can see some kind of indications what is the size of the weapon, and of course the historical weapons preserved and found from the time. But the overall length should be somewhere around from the armpit to your chin or nose, so around this height. So this is a Malleus Martialis sword made from some historical examples, so this might be very close to it, what they used at the time. And if you look at the Marozzo's pictures, you can see that the handle is very long, even weirdly long. There are the lugs, though the masters say that the lugs can be LGO or LZT, they can be, or you don't necessarily have to have them there. There is also no side rings, okay? As usually in the big swords you see the side rings, but of course sometimes no. But in the Marozzo's text, for example, and I think in Anonymous Place too, there are techniques that you clearly cannot do if you have the rings here, because you can't just do the placing. And also the way that we use the sword and move it around, the rings will be on the way when you swing the sword, and they will dig into your wrist, because lots of the movements will go through your wrist in the first place and then from the other places. So, the general height or the length of the weapon, of course the masters say that it should be proportionate to the person using it. So this is maybe good for me and my general height and so on, but yeah. The handle should be about the length of your forearm, so fairly long. And of course we cannot know if it's this part or all this part, but we have the historical examples. The L-setti, the small lugs, can be or cannot be there, and no side rings. If we go back here, the guy on the left side, that's probably a good indication what kind of sword Marazzo was talking about. Because this has pretty much the same features that this type of weapons usually have. So like what Pedro showed, the 200 sword from Pedro Monte, for example, it's the same but slightly bigger. I think it's okay. The bigger difference is probably the size of the handle and maybe slightly longer blade. But if we compare these two, thank you. You can see that it's just slightly bigger 200 sword.
Please put the sword in the center. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And if we had a Spadone here, it would be probably around this height, so something in between. And I think body also, thank you, body also gives you fairly same measures for the 200 sword. So if I'm not wrong, the body sword should be around the armpit, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, something like this. So the same but different. Yeah. Different master, slightly further down the line in time, and a bit of different practices. So this sword here is from Roberto Gotti's collection, I think, and this is attributed to the Bolognese 200 sword. Yes?
A question. I can see this little heart, this little...
The L here?
Yeah,
yep.
Like this. In your sword is different.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know.
Okay.
Easy answer. So I think it's a matter of preference, matter of like time and fashion, this kind of thing, but they are still doing the same work.
Maybe it's like the shield in the the feather.
Well, the use is of course the same. It is there to protect your hands, because the longer swords, if I don't have the L-setti there, I will have to lift my sword very high to prevent my opponent's sword to come to my head. So it's definitely there to protect your hands and also make the blade length more manageable. But if we look at the different types of 200 sword or Spadoni or Montante, they will have this kind, the spike kinds as I do, and the German ones have often the flower petal type of things. But it's probably just a question of style. Also the placement varies some, because if you look at the Marazzo's pictures, this one is not the best example because we cannot really see, but it's around here, the lugs. But this sword, of course, is very different looking than in the carvings that gives you the guards and so on. But in the pictures of the guards and so on, the L-setti is somewhere around here. So it changes. And they probably have several 200 swords, and maybe they were not the same.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. But these kind of questions are interesting because we get to have a bit of conversation, and I can give you very long, I don't know, answers. Yes, so Yep. So, in there, it's on the right side, the picture. It's a replica from the previous sword of this one. Okay. It's made by Florian Fortner, pretty much one-to-one reproduction of the sword, and I got to use it, got to try it, and it was made exactly as the old blade, so they took really like a precise measures of the blade thickness, taper, and this kind of thing. So, for one, the techniques that we do gives us an idea that it's a very quick weapon, because if we want to do the techniques that are done, for example the fast spins, it's not doable with very long and heavy weapon. Of course not Montante, they are not super heavy, or Spadoni, but still when they are long with big handles and so on, you're gonna do this kind of movements that we do. You will see tomorrow when we practice what I'm talking about. And of course this is a weapon for dueling context, so it needs to be able to be fast and usable. So it's suitable for thrusting and cutting, obviously, and the rotation point is fairly low down the blade, and the blade is not super stiff, it's very flexible in the end. So with these attributes, the tip is also super fast. It will move like a snake when you use it. So if we compare it to the, for example, the Spadone or Montante rules, they are often wide, big cuts, and this one moves very fast in a straight line. The original full length around 150, of course. Probably it was made for someone who is according to those dimensions, but yeah. So we can possibly conclude with this information that it's not the same as Spadone. But of course, it is just a conclusion and the understanding of how the blade is supposed to work and how the actions and plays are supposed to work. Because some people practice the plays with the actual Spadone, but it's of course a choice that you make.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do these swords had edges, like sharp edges, or they were just intended for training?
These, as far as I know, have been sharp.
Okay.
Good. But of course, they probably didn't practice
Yeah.
in the training hall with the sharks.
Okay. So they were using them for dueling.
Yes.
Not only the one-handed shots.
Yeah. All of the, well, it's the next issue here. So, Marozzo and Anonimo. Anonimo, like I said, he talks, or we can presume that he talks about actual fighting. He says that when we fight, we should fight with cunning and malice. So, yes, okay, be cruel, but as long as you win. But Marozzo has sections that are clearly for fencing, as in context of training fencing in the training hall. But then Marozzo has the sections that he calls abbattimenti.
Fiora?
No, Marozzo, abbattimenti.
Battimenti.
Yes. So those sections are like in Manciolino's book, he talks about spada da filo, so the sharp blade. Marozzo, in the same context, talks about abbattimenti. So he clearly says that these plays or series of plays are for actual fighting and not for like training fencing. So the dueling context. Well, we're not going to go into the dueling context now, but like a man against man. But also Marozzo talks about that sometimes you fight in groups, which he implies on skirmish, like for what reason, we don't know, go and make trouble in the city, something like this. We don't know why they had skirmishes, but anyways, and of course the weapon was still relevant in the warfare military contexts. Like, in between the ranks of the pikes, there are always the specialists with the two-handed swords and these kind of things. Go and hold this bridge alone with this big sword and so on. But yes, we are still in the civilian context fighting. So, according to the Bolognese fencing theory is fairly comprehensive. it gives us really clear definitions on how to fight from what distance. So the use of the two-handed sword is very tied to this theory. So we have the gioco largo, which is the wide moment. This is to control the distance, create the tempo, and control the space. So very much the same as what we do with montante. Okay, make a big space around you and this kind of thing. And as you will see tomorrow, we will do very similar moves with the Marozzo's plays. And of course, showing off. Then there's the gioco stretto, which is the close, narrow distance where we are actually in the hurting distance of our opponent. Gioco largo doesn't mean that we are so far that we cannot hit our opponent, but the main point of gioco largo is not to hit your opponent, it's to make a way for the play that you will actually try to wound your opponent or win them. So gioco stretto, they are in the closer distance and the movements are a lot more narrow. And they are not completely dissimilar to, for example, what Fiore uses in those plays. We will see lots of similarities tomorrow when we practice. And of course, the Marozzo, Vadi, and the other guys in Fiore, they are from fairly same place, not too far away in a chronological manner from each other. And of course they are swords, so it's not super different, but we can see the differences. Stretta di mezza spada is not a distance per se, it's a situation. So when the swords are crossed, for example, when I throw a strike and my opponent stands there and takes the strike in the sword, it's stretta di mezza spada, the blades are crossed on middle. So this is not a distance. This of course requires distance, but this is the place where we want to go if we want to wound our opponent. So first I want to control their blade and then make my move in relative safety. This is the distance that a Bolognese fencer is trying to get into when they are fighting in earnest. And also all the masters say that stretta techniques, and especially stretta di mezza spada, is the place where you want to be if you want to show how excellent you are, your virtu, okay? Because lots of the dueling context obviously was centered around showing who is the better person. Because if you go to duel, you will need to prove yourself, and so on. Gioco della presa means grappling plays, wrestling, grabbing your opponent's weapon, throwing your opponent, kicking the nuts, this kind of thing. It's where it gets a bit more scrappy. But again, this is done with two-handed sword, like you will see below. So it works in all distances, and so on. Yeah, nothing more to say about this, I think, because it's no use to explain it too much, because we will do everything tomorrow. Do you have any questions about this stuff now? Yeah, that's my presentation, because the theory part is pretty much covered by my predecessors. I don't know what this means, but thank you for your attention. If you want to see more of my work, go visit my Patreon. And yeah, any questions now? No? Yeah.
Encienda la luz de Jacopo. Bueno, pues la conferencia han acabado, o sea, se han hecho preguntas específicas, ¿no?, de cada una de nuestras conferencias, a lo mejor para justamente lo que él estaba exponiendo. No hay alguna pregunta, pero antes de cerrar ya el ciclo de conferencia, esta presentación del evento, si tenéis alguna pregunta genérica que podamos responder a alguno de los tres, este es el momento de comentarlo. Vengamos todos para acá. ¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Todo resuelto? O sea, es que nos explicamos maravillosamente. Pues nada, pues muchísimas gracias por habernos aguantado. Y nada, y este es el comienzo del fin de semana. Era importante para nosotros introducir con estas explicaciones lo que vamos a trabajar todo el fin de semana, para que también se comprenda que no es solamente una parte física, una parte de interpretación de textos concretos para su aplicación práctica, sino que también hay un trabajo detrás de contexto. ¿Tú qué haces aquí? Bueno, hay una parte atrás de contexto y que va enlazando con 3 trabajos que per se son diferentes de maestros que tienen por sí mismos una entidad relevante y que para ser entendidos no necesitan de otro, pero que a la vez hay un hilo conductor entre uno y otro y se complementan, ¿no? Yo lo que quiero que cuando acabe esta serie de seminarios no que os quedéis con una impresión de ya lo sé todo, ahora, o sea, como en Matrix os acordáis de ya sé Kung Fu. No, no vais a aprender nada definitivo, pero sí creo que vamos a generar las suficientes dudas, las suficientes inquietudes para que por vuestra cuenta podáis seguir trabajando y cuando os acerquéis a un tratado lo veáis de otra manera. O sea, no lo veáis simplemente como esas cajitas cerradas que contienen técnicas, que contienen conceptos, que a ver cómo lo lográis encajar en vuestra práctica habitual. No, quiero que esas cajitas se vayan abriendo y se vayan enlazando una con otra, ¿no? Si conseguimos eso, yo creo que la serie de seminarios va a ser un éxito. Y si no lo conseguimos, pues bueno, quizá la siguiente. Pues nada, muchas gracias.